In January 2013, Germany asked for something back that it thought was safely stored on foreign soil. Not weapons, not art, gold. 300 tons of it, sitting in vaults inside the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, 80 feet below Manhattan. The German central bank wanted it moved home, physically, bar by bar. The Fed's answer stunned people who'd never questioned the system before. It would take 7 years, not 7 days. 7 years to move gold that supposedly never left the building. Today, you're going to find out why that answer terrified more people than it reassured, and why the story of America's gold didn't start with Germany. It started nearly a century earlier, with a president who made it illegal for his own citizens to own the very metal his country claimed to be built on. Here's what most people believe. Fort Knox holds the gold. Fort Knox is safe. Fort Knox is the reason the dollar means anything at all. That belief has been repeated so often it feels like bedrock fact, the kind you don't question, the kind taught in classrooms without a footnote. But the paper trail tells a stranger story, one with disappearing audits, midnight transfers, and a government that has spent 90 years asking the public to simply trust the number on the label. The story really begins in 1933. The country was drowning in the Depression, banks were collapsing by the hundreds, and Franklin Roosevelt needed a way to stop the bleeding. His solution was radical. Executive Order 60-102 made it a federal crime for American citizens to hoard gold coins, bullion, or certificates. Ordinary people were given weeks to hand over their gold to the government at a fixed price, under threat of fines and prison. Overnight, gold stopped being something Americans held and became something only the government was allowed to hold. The following year, the Gold Reserve Act pushed it further, revaluing gold and centralizing the nation's supply under federal control. By 1937, a new fortress was rising on a U.S. Army post in Kentucky, purpose-built to store what had just become the most controlled substance in America. Fort Knox opened in 1937, and the first shipment of gold arrived by train under armed guard in January 1937. For a while, the system made a strange kind of sense. The dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, a promise sealed at Bretton Woods in 1944 that turned the United States into the anchor of the entire global financial system. Foreign governments held dollars because dollars could, in theory, always be converted back into gold. That promise was the quiet engine behind decades of American economic dominance. But promises like that only hold as long as nobody tests them at scale. By the 1960s, people started testing it. The U.S. had been spending. Vietnam, the space race, a growing welfare state, and dollars were flooding the world faster than the gold backing them could keep up. European governments, France especially, began doing something almost aggressive in its simplicity. They sent ships to New York, handed over dollars, and asked for their gold. Charles de Gaulle reportedly ordered French gold reserves physically flown home from American vaults, unwilling to leave his country's wealth sitting on someone else's promise. Word spread. Other nations followed. The drain accelerated. By August 1971, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Richard Nixon appeared on television on a Sunday night and, in under 20 minutes, ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold entirely. No congressional vote. No warning to allies. Just an announcement, later nicknamed the Nixon shock, that the rules the entire post-war economy had been built on no longer applied. The dollar would now float, backed by nothing but the promise of the U.S. government itself. Overnight, the world's money supply became, officially, faith-based. Here's the twist that most retellings skip. If the dollar was no longer tied to gold, the obvious question was, why keep hundreds of millions of ounces of it locked in a Kentucky vault at all? And that question leads to the strangest fact in this entire story. The last time the United States conducted a complete, verified, physical audit of the gold at Fort Knox was 1953. Not 1971, not 2001. 1953, under President Eisenhower, using methods that wouldn't meet modern accounting standards. Since then, there have been partial inspections, congressional visits with cameras, photo-op tours where politicians hold up a single bar for reporters, but a full, independent, bar-by-bar verification of the roughly 147.3 million ounces the government claims to hold? That hasn't happened in over 70 years. Officially, the gold is there. The U.S. Mint publishes the figure every year, unchanged, down to the decimal. In reality, the only people who have ever laid eyes on the full vault contents are government employees, and no outside auditor, not the Federal Reserve, not an independent accounting firm, not a foreign government. has been allowed to conduct a comprehensive count since the Cold War was in its early years. Ron Paul spent years in Congress demanding a real audit and was repeatedly told it wasn't necessary. Necessary or inconvenient. Which brings the story back to Germany, and to that 7-year timeline. When the Bundesbank asked for its gold back in 2013, it wasn't paranoia, it was due diligence, prompted partly by a segment on German television questioning whether the reserves were really where they were supposed to be. The Fed's answer, that it would take years to physically locate, verify, and ship the bars home, raised a question nobody in power wanted to say out loud. If a first-world central bank couldn't get simple confirmation of its own property on a reasonable timeline, what does that imply about the ease of verifying anyone else's? The gold eventually came home. Germany completed the transfer years ahead of the original schedule, finishing in 2017. And when it arrived, some of the bars reportedly didn't match the original bar numbers and markings the Bundesbank had recorded decades earlier. Officials downplayed it as a matter of old melting and recasting standards. Critics saw it as confirmation that gold reserves move, get swapped, get leased, get shuffled between vaults in ways the public ledger never fully captures. None of this proves the vault is empty. No credible evidence says Fort Knox holds nothing. But that's almost beside the point. The entire foundation of the modern financial system rests on a currency, the dollar, that once promised to be exchangeable for a physical asset the public isn't allowed to verify exists in the stated quantity. You are told to trust a number nobody outside a small circle of federal employees has independently confirmed in 7 decades. That trust isn't backed by gold anymore. It's backed by the absence of an audit. So here's where it leaves us. Somewhere in Kentucky, behind granite walls 22 feet thick, past blast-proof doors that no single person holds the full combination to, sits a number the entire world's financial confidence quietly depends on. Maybe it's exactly 147. 3 million ounces, sitting untouched since the Eisenhower administration. Maybe it isn't. The only people who could tell you for certain have never had to. And after 90 years of asking Americans to simply believe the label on the vault door, isn't it worth asking what exactly everyone is still afraid to count?